Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to convene the Utilities and Commerce Committee. Sergeants, please call the absent members. We do not have a quorum, so we're going to commence as a subcommittee. And we'll begin with Senator Hill, and we're going to end with Senator Hill as well. He has two bills. Your preference in terms of order, SB 48 or SB 541?
541 first.
Fantastic. I'm sorry? We don't have a quorum yet. Okay. May I begin?
Thank you. The SB 541 will make improvements to the Transportation Enforcement Branch within the PUC. Over the years, the branch has fallen into disorder, leading to poor program performance and a lack of safety enforcement. SB 541 helps to fix the branch's problems by establishing new program priorities such as improved customer service and enforcement. The bill requires the branch to report to the legislature on its ability to meet the new goals and to identify what changes might be needed in order for them to do so. While in some cases they can already do so, the bill makes it abundantly clear that law enforcement officers can enforce provisions of the Public Utilities Code as they relate to the proper regulation of limousines, buses, and moving companies. The bill also makes it clear that all law enforcement officers can impound illegally operating limos or buses for 30 days to ensure that unsafe vehicles are removed from the road. It's my understanding that some ride-sharing companies may have some problems with the impoundment part of the bill, and on Friday they suggested an amendment to address their concern. This bill is double referred to the Assembly Public Safety Committee, and I will resolve their issues there. And I think they have some tentative language that we've looked at, and I think it will work fine. SB 541 is about helping the PUC Transportation Branch do its job better and about making sure law enforcement officers have the appropriate tools at their disposal to keep our roads safe. And the bill is supported by the Greater California Livery Association and the California Moving and Storage Association.
Thank you, Senator. Other support witnesses?
Go ahead.
No, you're doing fine, Chuck. Keep it up.
Age before.
Good job.
All right. Yeah. So much for that. Actually, I think
Jerry spoke first.
Yeah, I know.
I think I'm older than Greg, so
I think I'm
that's
older
even
than both
worse.
of you.
Yeah, no, I doubt that. Mr. Chairman and members, Chuck Cole on behalf of the California Moving and Storage Association. Our members have paid millions of dollars to the PUC, and frankly, we're very concerned about the nature of protecting against gas pipelines that leak as well. But we would like to see more enforcement in dealing with illegal movers, particularly those folks who are brokers or movers that don't follow the California law, don't protect consumers the way the law requires. And we have been somewhat frustrated with PUC's efforts in the past to do that. We are working very closely with the Senator and appreciate his hard work to encourage stronger efforts in that direction. I would like to comment on the legislative group from the PUC who helped us get a bill through a couple of years ago that would stop identity theft of legal movers and have their identities being used by illegal movers. We strongly support the measure.
Thank you. I know there's one more support witness. We're going to establish quorum first. Please call the roll.
Rendon?
Here.
Rendon here. Patterson? Here. Patterson here. Ashajian? Here. Ashajian here. Bonilla? Burke? Here. Burke here. Daly? Here. Daly here. Eggman? Garcia? Hadley? Here. Hadley here. Hernandez? Obernolte? Here. Obernolte here. Jones? Quirk? Here. Quirk here. Santiago? Here. Santiago here. Ting? Williams? Here. Williams here.
Thank you. We have quorum. Please continue.
Mr. Chair and members, Greg Cook, representing the Greater California Livery Association. We're pleased to support this bill. This is a very important bill. Enforcement of state law is critical to the success of our business. As a result of that concern about 5 years ago, we actually doubled the fee that we voluntarily doubled the fee that we pay into the Public Utilities Transportation reimbursable account for the purpose of assuring that we would have increased enforcement. That's not occurred. This bill will assure that it will be, and our money will be well spent. Thank you. We look forward to your support.
Move the bill.
Thank you. Motion from Mr. Daly, second from Mr. Hadley. There are other persons who wish to speak in support of this bill? Anyone opposed? We have any questions? Mr. Quirk?
I'll be supporting the bill today. However, we do have questions about proper procedures with regard to officers seizing material. Is there due process? We'll take those up in public safety, so I advise anyone else who's concerned about that we will take this up in public safety, and I urge you to support the bill today, and we'll worry about the other issues in public safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quirk. Mr. Obernolte?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also will be supporting the bill. However, I do not sit on public safety, and so I had a concern I wanted to raise just so that you could put my fears at rest. So my concern is regarding the definition of what a peace officer is that might can conduct confiscations and make arrests. And specifically, I wanted to talk about the definition of airport law enforcement. So reading from the bill says, a peace officer is any person regularly employed as an airport law enforcement officer if the primary duty of the person is the enforcement of the law. Or when performing necessary duties with respect to patrons, employees, and properties of the employing agency in or about the properties owned, operated, and administered by the employing agency, which is the airport. So a little known fact about me, I got my political start on an airport board of directors. So I can tell you that the definition in this, even though we had absolutely zero airport employees tasked specifically with law enforcement, the definition in your bill would apply to all of our airport employees. And I just have a little bit of heartburn about an aircraft fueler being empowered to conduct arrests, which is what it seems like the bill does. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I can. The intent of the bill certainly was to limit it rather than broaden those who have the authority to act as a peace officer in terms of the confiscation or the holding of a vehicle. It also included harbor police before and others. So the idea is to really limit it and just apply to police agencies, airport police, statewide law enforcement, and local sheriffs and police, but certainly not the intent is to include airport personnel or people who work in an airport. And we'll make sure that there's clarification that's necessary before it gets to Mr. Quirk's committee. We'll make sure that it's clearly defined that it only applies to those law enforcement peace officers and not to other personnel.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate the clarification. And just to, the point is performing necessary duties with respect to the airport could mean a wide variety of things. And so I'd appreciate you tightening that. But I will support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other questions from committee members? Would you like to close, Senator?
I respectfully ask for an aye vote, members. Thank you.
Thank you. Please take the roll. I'm sorry. We have a motion from Mr. Dowling and a second from Mr. Hadley. And the motion is do pass and re-refer to Public Safety Committee.
Brendan?
Aye.
Brendan, aye. Patterson? Aye. Patterson, aye. Eshajian? Aye. Eshajian, aye. Bonilla? Burke? Aye. Burke, aye. Daly? Aye. Daly, aye. Eggman? Aye. Eggman, aye. Garcia? Aye. Garcia, aye. Hadley? Aye. Hadley, aye. Hernandez? Obernolte? Aye. Obernolte, aye. Quirk? Aye. Quirk, aye. Santiago? Aye. Santiago, aye. Ting? Aye. Ting, aye. Williams? Aye. Williams, aye.
Thank you.
That bill is out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next up is SB 48 regarding the Public Utilities Commission.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. After long years of management neglect, the PUC has lost its way in its mission to provide safe and reliable service at reasonable rates. What had first been exposed as a problem of safety culture at the PUC grew in 2013 to encompass a failure to keep track of how utilities spend ratepayer money following audits by the Department of Finance and State Auditor. The news media cataloged other abuses, such as the PUC's legal maneuvering to claim that the enforcement provisions of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Law and the Public Records Act do not apply to it. And now, most infamously, emails have emerged documenting unethical and illegal backdoor communications that place the interests of the state's most powerful utilities against their customers. To reform the PUC, you, Mr. Chair, Senators Hueso and Leno, and I have introduced bills. SB 48's place in this portfolio is to address 3 areas specifically: to return the ability to choose and review directors and other staff to the full commission and not just the president. To improve governance, the bill would require the commissioners to approve performance measures for the PUC and its executive director. To clarify that judicial review for violations of open meeting laws and the Public Records Act is the domain of Superior Court, as it is for other state agencies. And to require the PUC to conduct outreach to communities affected by its decisions. The PUC has become too comfortable allowing the regulated utilities to come to them instead of making the effort to listen to the broader community and public. SB 48 also requires the PUC's administrative law judges adhere to the state's administrative adjudication code of ethics, that the PUC clarify how long it takes to finish proceedings, that the PUC post written testimony and advice letter materials on its website, and that the PUC meet 6 times a year in Sacramento. In talking to staff, it has come to my attention that recent amendments may have inadvertently removed reporting language that asks the PUC to state what it is doing to keep rates low. I'm happy to work with the committee as the bill moves forward to find the best way to add the language back into the bill that we inadvertently took out of the bill. So thank you for pointing that out, your outstanding consultants and staff, Mr. Chair. I respectfully ask for an aye vote, member.
Thank you. Others who wish to speak in support?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Nikki Moore with the California Newspaper Publishers Association. We think this is a common sense reform, and by restoring original jurisdiction under a Bagley-Keene Act or a Public Records Act action, it enhances public access. And as your analysis notes, sometimes it's difficult for public to access a PUC. So we respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Others in support? Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to this bill? Take questions from committee members. Mr. Quirk.
So I've alerted Senator Hill to my concern. So the Bagley-Keene, that's all fine. I also think it's fine if the commission as a whole can hire or fire the executive director and the lawyer. The lawyer, I find it's fine if they set up performance goals. But my concern is that one of 2 things don't happen. And I've seen this in city councils, school boards, board of supervisors where the people are full-time. And there's sort of 2 things that can go wrong. One is that the executive director, be it the superintendent or the county manager, start setting policy as opposed to executing it. And the second problem is when departments start getting micromanaged by members and sometimes managed from different directions. One member wants one wants another, and they just bypass. Under the current system, where the executive director is reporting to the president, that's unlikely to happen. It's clear who his boss is, and you have somebody who's been appointed by the governor, subject to the legislature, noticeably in charge. It's not clear to me in reading the bill. I mean, a lot of what I see in here with regard to those 2 with regard to this I like. But I'm still concerned about either a runaway executive director or commissioners micromanaging. Could you address this? Because in addition to what is written in this bill, there are a lot of other things which aren't written, which are in previous legislation, and I don't know quite how all of this gets balanced in the long run.
All right. Well, very good. And thank you. Mr. Chair, may I respond?
Yes,
thank
please.
you. Thank you. I look at this as, when you have the executive director setting policy or the micromanaging by commissioners or members, as we can do ourselves sometimes, what you have right now in place at the PUC is the president selecting the executive director. So you have one person that is then directing the direction, directing the policy, directing the activities, the actions of not just the executive director, but all of the commissioners. So if you don't meet whatever standard as a commissioner that the president has, or if you're in disfavor with the president of the commission, then you will not have much standing with the executive director, and whatever your policy directions are will not get heard by that executive director. So to me, what it does is it opens, similar to a city council and a city manager, the ability for every member to input into the actions of that and the implementation of the policy that's created, and not just have it be, as we saw, it took nearly 4 years for the PUC to develop a safety policy after the San Bruno explosion, because it wasn't the president's issue. It wasn't on the president's mind, so that direction never went to the executive director. Certainly the other commissioners would have had the ability, and I would have thought the interest to do that, because it would make the improvement. And I think it's important that the legislature clarify to the commission that that authority is with all the commissioners. There's a quote that Commissioner Farron said, who was appointed by Governor Brown and spent, I think, 2 years on the commission, and then he had to retire for health reasons. And his comments were, and I thought, we commissioners rightly are held responsible for what happens in this building, and yet we do not have any effective means to provide guidance and oversight to the CPU's permanent management and staff. And that just, it's not a dictatorial environment. It is today, but it shouldn't be. It should be open to, as our legislature has 120 members, as the city council has 5, board of supervisors generally 5, it allows for that collective wisdom that's brought together to make those decisions and to guide and direct the executive director and staff. So I think, to me, when we're dealing with such extremely important issues, whether it's related to safety or whether it's related to rate stabilization and rate determination of rates in the state, it's important that everyone have a voice in the direction. And so I think that it's critical that we move in that direction.
Yeah, but to what extent were the problems of the last 4 years due to the person who was president at that time versus a systematic problem? I mean, you could have 5 commissioners who are disengaged. I'm just not sure that this actually solves the problem. I'm just not sure it solves a problem, as opposed to addresses a problem that occurred under a particular president.
And just in a quick response, I think what we saw over the last 4 years is a president who was disengaged. Priorities were certainly different, but there was no opportunity for any of the other commissioners who brought varied experiences, education, and priorities to the commission to exercise their authority or their ability to make the changes that were necessary if they were. It's probably tougher to find 5 disinterested than sometimes just 1. And I think that's what the benefit of this.
All right. Well, that's a good answer to the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quirk.
Thank you, Mr. Quirk. Mr. Hadley and then Mr. Obernolte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, thanks for bringing this bill forward. There's a lot about it I like. One area where I think we could also strengthen the overall governance is by increasing legislative oversight of this body. This bill calls for 6 meetings a year to be held in Sacramento. I'm not sure what exactly that affects, but I would love to know if you and your office would consider amending to increase the number of statutorily required legislative meetings with one or more of the commissioners. We're currently in a situation where we have one statutorily mandatory meeting a year. And given the significance of this body and the wide scope of its activities, I would love to have the opportunity to interview commissioners. And I believe under current law, we only interview the president, whereas if we move in the direction of empowering the other commissioners, that the legislature should have the ability to interview multiple commissioners.
That's very good. We'll look at that. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Hadley.
Thank you. Mr. Obernolte and then Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Hill, I very much appreciate you addressing the issue of the inadvertent removal of the statement about the reporting language on the reduction of energy costs. I didn't quite follow the resolution of that, though. Are you committing to reinstate that reporting requirement?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it.
Mr. Obernolte, Mr. Patterson?
Thank you. And I'm assuming verbatim. Verbatim reinstatement?
I think it is verbatim. I think there's been discussion we've had with the staff, your staff on it. I think that,
Right.
that but it'll be something that meets with your approval.
Right.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. Wanted to just engage just a bit with respect to Member Quirk. I probably would generally be understanding a bit. My experience in private life has been an executive experience. My experience as mayor of Fresno was in an executive form of government. And so I can understand some of the concerns, but where I think this is an area of necessity and safety is the responsibility that becomes more democratized and more open and more apparent. As an elected chief executive, I was accountable to the electorate. The president is not elected; these are appointed positions, and I do think that the more you democratize the process, which I believe this is what you're attempting to do, the more accountability there is and the less likelihood that there is to have a runaway executive or some of the other concerns. Although I think they are legitimate concerns. But I do also think you have, I think, effectively tried to strike a balance to move the pendulum. And whether it was a president alone or an institutional, let's just say the message is loud and clear. And moving that pendulum, I think, is generally good for all parties concerned in this. So I appreciate it. I'll be voting for it, and thank you for the willingness to reinstate the oversight.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Mr. Ting?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, I just wanted to commend you for bringing this legislation forward. I know that one piece of legislation doesn't solve all the various problems with the Commission, but I think this is a very good step in the right direction. I also do want to agree with my colleague from Manhattan Beach on his comments that the PUC is in definite need of significantly more legislative oversight. If the singular hearing where we had the new president of the PUC was telling it all, it is that we need to see them more often. One of my biggest issues with the PUC is they've really started to, frankly, step into our role, which is policymaking. And we've seen them really almost lose focus on their regulatory function and start to steer clear into areas of policymaking which are firmly in our purview. And I would really urge you to, as you continue to be a champion on this issue, to really take a much harder look at that, because I think that they've had mission creep, and that they need to really continue to focus back on their mission, which was primarily regulatory. And I think when they have focused, they've done it well. But I think they've had issues the last couple of years where they really haven't been able to do that, and we've seen to the detriment of consumers and to the public, unfortunately. So again, really commend you for this work. I know that it can't solve all the various problems we have at the Commission, but really appreciate this good step.
Thank you, Mr. Ting, and I appreciate the comments and the suggestion on that. That's very good and true, too.
Thank you, Mr. Ting. Others? Would you like to close?
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just, again, want to thank the consultants and the staff on both sides of the aisle in this committee for your great efforts and appreciate it very much. So thank you. Respectfully ask for an aye vote. Members, thank you.
Thank you. Just to clarify, as Mr. Hill noted, he will be amending SB 48 in appropriations to reinsert a sentence that was deleted verbatim regarding a requirement that the PUC report on actions taken to address rates beginning on page 9 at line 22. Correct?
Yes, correct.
Great. Just with respect to SB 48, it has some of the key elements of PUC reform as we've been looking for. You mentioned that you've been working on this. I've been working on this. Mr. Wesso has been working on this. Mr. Leno has been working on this. It's there's a tremendous need for some significant PUC reform. I think now is the time for a lot of that reform to take place. This piece of legislation is a good one, a very good one that includes the judicial review process as well as some of the public records changes that need to happen as well. It's been a good part of my weekend reading the storm loss report, which came out last week and is consistent with a lot of these recommendations. So I want to thank you for including those particular elements in what is probably going to be a larger package of PUC reforms that I think we need to work on. So we have and with respect to Mr. Hadley's mention of the statutorily mandated hearings, absolutely right. And I think it's something that the PUC, we need to have more of. Quite frankly, it's been this body, this institution has been deficient in terms of making sure that they were here. I mean, this year was the first time in, I believe, 3 years that the PUC president appeared before, at least before the Assembly Utilities Commission, Assembly Utilities and Commerce Committee, and that's our fault. And I think our need to have greater oversight over organizations such as the PUC is something that we need to really take seriously. We have a motion. We do not have a motion. We have a motion from Mr. Dowley and a second from Mr. Obalnoty. Please take the roll.
The motion is to pass and re-refer to Appropriations Committee. Rendon?
Aye.
Rendon, aye. Patterson?
Aye.
Patterson, aye. Ashajian? Ashajian, aye. Bonilla? Bonilla, aye. Burke?
Aye.
Burke, aye. Dowley? Dowley, aye. Eggman? Eggman, aye. Garcia? Garcia, aye. Hadley? Hadley, aye. Hernandez? Obernolte? Obernolte, aye. Quirk?
Aye.
Quirk, aye. Santiago? Santiago, aye. Ting? Ting, aye. Williams?
Thank you, Miguel.
Williams, aye.
Thank you all.
That bill is out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, members, for the conversation, discussion, and the vote.
Thank you. This concludes the hearing of bills. We will hold the roll open for 5 minutes to allow absent members to vote. Yes. White one.